Hey everyone, we want to share valuable insights here regarding cloud security, and we're inviting here a professional regarding about this topic that right now is a very warm topic on cybersecurity. So let me introduce you very quickly here to Keith Mokris. He's the VP of Marketing and Orca Security. And here on RSec, we invited him in order that he can share us very valuable insights regarding the illusion of security in the cloud and more valuable lessons that perhaps he can add us today. Thank you for coming, Kate. How are you?
Hi, Humberto. Thank you very much to you and the entire RSec team for having me. As you mentioned, I'm the VP of Marketing with a product marketing background here at Orca Security, and I'm really excited to be a part of today's interview, talking about all the different cloud security concerns, threats, and common stories that I think anyone listening can take advantage of. So thank you so much, and looking forward to answering the questions that you have today.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's just start with the basics. What do most organizations misunderstand about the cloud share responsibility model?
Yeah, so many organizations misunderstand that there's an incredible responsibility that they shoulder with the cloud security model. So, importantly, the cloud service provider is going to manage all of the security of the underlying cloud infrastructure. However, organizations are responsible for how they secure and configure this infrastructure. So, you need to make sure that all your databases, APIs, and configurations are done correctly. You need to make sure that your workloads and applications are free of vulnerabilities and compliance issues. And then certainly all of these interconnected components come together and ensure that your overall risk posture is secure. So many organizations ultimately think that by moving to the cloud, they're offsourcing all of their security, when in fact, there's a lot of key requirements that they have to be thinking about.
Okay, sounds interesting. In your experience, what's often overlooked when relying solely on built-in security from Amazon Web Services, Azure, or Google Cloud?
Yeah, so AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud do an incredible job at securing all of the underlying pieces that they're responsible for in the cloud. But I think one of the things that organizations overlook, whether they're multi cloud or single cloud, is that any manual process becomes incredibly difficult in the cloud. So understanding that cloud applications and cloud services can be incredibly dynamic, the pace of the business is moving incredibly quickly. And I think a lot of organizations assume that someone else is going to be responsible for configuring and securing all of this infrastructure and all of these cloud native applications. And I think if you're doing it in a piecemeal approach, it's going to be incredibly difficult at scale, and it's going to be really hard to achieve a high level of ROI without a comprehensive cloud security strategy.
And why do many companies only realize the gaps after a breach or an audit?
Yeah, so many organizations realize that they have gaps when something wrong happens. And this is the unfortunate part of any security program, whether it's in the cloud or it's in a more traditional on premise infrastructure. There are many different attack vectors, especially in the cloud. You need to think about how you've configured cloud infrastructure. You need to think about vulnerabilities that impact your workloads and applications, your APIs, your storage buckets, your databases that can all hold PII or other sensitive information. And unfortunately, for many organizations, they're not constantly using automation and a continuous risk posture approach when looking at all of these different components. So it's very common that a vulnerability impacts the organization, some sort of breach or data leakage occurs, and that's when they realize that there's a consequence for their security program and that they need to make improvements.
Okay, and can you give me an example or common blind spots that puts data at serious risk?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things that can put data at serious risk in the cloud, but one of the ones I want to highlight is identity and entitlement issues. So identities and entitlements refer to if my name is Keith and I'm operating in the cloud, I might be given a user account that might be like Keith12345. And it can be very difficult to audit who that account belongs to where I'm sitting at a desk in the world. And if you've given me over permissioned account roles, you've given me a lot of broad access, lots of different users with these entitlements could have access to sensitive information. And then at scale for an organization, it can be incredibly difficult to audit. So, one of the most common blind spots a lot of organizations have is which users have which entitlements, which gives them access to sensitive data.
Okay, that's very interesting insights from your part, Kate. Let's talk about a little bit about the risk at every layer of the cloud stack. Let's unpack the different layers: compute, storage, working, identity. Where do you see the highest risk regarding this?
Yeah, so in the cloud, you need to think about all the different layers of your technology stack and where risk relies in each one. So if we take compute, for example, you have the operating system, which might have vulnerabilities in the operating system and the packages or applications running on top of it. You also have to think about the configurations, which can impact your overall compliance posture. You then have to think about your storage. Are you within that storage bucket or within your storage components? Do you have sensitive data? And who has access to that sensitive data? Have you configured that storage bucket properly? Networking is incredibly important, especially the dynamic components in the cloud. You need to think about inbound and outbound network access, as well as inside the network perimeter. How can your applications communicate within one another? And then finally, identity risks are incredibly challenging, where you have lots of different users who have different entitlements, and you have to find a way to continuously automate risk posture of those entitlements to make sure user controls are essentially audited correctly and you don't have over permissioned or dormant access within the cloud environment.
And how do misconfigurations at the infrastructure level cascade into business level consequences?
Yeah, so misconfigurations can have huge consequences at the business level. So, an example of this might be I have a cloud database that has permission granted to a lot of users that shouldn't, but then also have a connection to a cloud native application with a serious number of vulnerabilities. At the business level, this can mean that my organization is leaking sensitive consumer proprietary data to the world where an attacker can get a foothold through one of these different attack vectors and ultimately expose the business. And so, one of the things that a lot of organizations need to think about is what data could be exposed in the cloud because of one of these interconnected risks, for example.
Okay. And what does a typical risk map of a cloud native app look like?
Thinking about cloud native applications and their risk map is incredibly important. And it allows you to think like an attacker would. So, certainly, you have maybe some sort of underlying storage component, like a storage bucket or a database that's connected to some sort of web app or cloud native application, serving this information to internal or external users. Importantly, there's the identity fabric connected to each component. So, who has access to the storage or the cloud native application itself? Which developers or DevOps team is responsible for building and deploying that application? And then finally, you might have network access. So, how is this application serving data internally or externally? And all of these different components are something you need to think about in that overall risk map.
Okay. And how can minor IAM mistake into a major breach?
Yeah, minor IAM mistakes can turn into a huge breach at an organization. One of the most common things I see at end user organizations is you onboard a bunch of developers, you give them broad resource or cloud account access, and then months later, you can't remember who has access to what and how do I ensure that their permissions are granted appropriately. And any of this access can lead to essentially the business being exposed, where a cloud account provides access to a lot of things that you didn't want that an attacker can get access to. And I would invite anyone to search this within Google, and you'll see a lot of instances at organizations where a simple over permissioned account led to a lot of access within their cloud environment.
Okay. That's very interesting. Let's talk about a little bit about the business impact. When we talk about cyber attacks, it's not just about technical damage. What are the real business consequences?
Yeah, so cyber attacks can lead to huge business consequences beyond just technical damage to an organization. So the first one might be brand reputation. A cyber attack can impact how people look at and trust your brand. This is certainly important in consumer-facing businesses, but is important in B2B contexts as well. People want to do business, organizations want to do business with companies that they can trust. So any sort of cyber attack can lead to issues in how people trust your brand, which can certainly impact the bottom line of your business. Secondly, an area that I'd want to highlight could be legal repercussions. If you have a breach, you might have legal consequences that you need to address that can lead to fines, monetary investment from all those legal issues, and again, reporting to all of your stakeholders. So I think it's important that folks think about cyber attacks not just in the technical impact, but the ROI and the implications that they have to the business.
Okay, great. And with that idea in mind, how does cloud insecurity affect compliance efforts? Think like GDPR, HIPAA, or other compliances that have been around the world, especially right now in the US.
So there are a lot of different compliance frameworks that organizations might need to think about internally or externally. And every organization knows the compliance frameworks that are relevant to them. HIPAA, GDPR, PCI DSS, SOC 2, and many others are all important. But what's important is that within those frameworks, you need to think about all the different layers of the cloud, how you've configured your cloud resources, your databases, your storage buckets, your applications, your networks. Within those compliance frameworks, there's guidance on all those different layers of the technology stack. And I think one of the most important things is you need to automate how you approach those different frameworks because compliance auditors want to ensure that they can get information in a timely manner and close any of those issues across the different layers of the technology stack as quickly as possible. So ultimately, thinking of compliance as part of your overall risk management program and building automations within that is going to lead you to some really good outcomes.
Okay. What role does security play in preserving brand reputation?
Security plays a critical role in every organization's brand reputation because ultimately people want to do business with brands that they trust and have demonstrated trust over a long period of time. Whether you're a financial services organization, a healthcare organization, or any other, you want to ensure that your customers, your internal stakeholders, or other business entities trust what you're doing and achieving through your security program. So I think as every company evolves and scales in the cloud, their brand reputation goes hand in hand with their overall security ROI.
Okay. And what does IP theft look like in the cloud era? Are companies underestimating the risk?
Yeah, so I think every company needs to estimate IP theft in the cloud properly. And this is important to go back to the shared responsibility model, where any data that you bring to the cloud and how you configure it, who has access to it, is still incredibly important at your organization. So recognizing that IP theft is access to data by outside sources that you don't want, and in the cloud era, you could easily leak information that could be accessible to the entire world. So every organization needs to ensure that they can identify their crown jewel assets, who has access to that information, and how it's overall secured using automation and using a risk prioritization approach.
Okay. Now let's talk about a little bit about securing Gen AI in the cloud. Regarding Gen AI, since it's reshaping everything, but how is it introducing new security concerns?
So Gen AI is greatly accelerating how cloud native applications are coded, built, and deployed. And with that comes incredible security concerns for the organization. Importantly, everything surrounding security with Gen AI is some form of a data security program. So ultimately, you want to make sure that any data accessed by Gen AI services is fundamentally secure. Next, you want to make sure that you have visibility into all of these Gen AI services. So this is a set of capabilities known as AI Security Posture Management, or AISPM. So where are these services being used across my org? Who has access to these services? And ultimately, are they configured properly? And this goes back to ensuring that you have a graph-based view to understand how all these interconnected components come together and thinking about some of these security concerns.
Okay. And right now, are people thinking enough about things like prompt injection, model leakage, or API abuse?
So there are a lot of security concerns when it comes to GenAI services and important capabilities and requirements like prompt injection, model leakage, or API abuse. And what's important is finding resources that help you model all of these different security concerns. So if you look at something like the OWASP Top 10 for LLMs or GenAI services, you'll see that some of them map very closely to application or API risks. And so all of these risks are not uncommon or special to these Gen AI services, but you need to think about them comprehensively, just like you would think about your applications or other services. I think the challenge with Gen AI is it's so new, it's evolving incredibly quickly, and it's taken the world by storm. And so every security team needs to make sure that they have visibility and can think about these different attack vectors just like they would their other applications.
Okay. From your experience, what are the best practices for securing AI models and the data around?
So, for securing AI models and the data around them, the fundamental thing that you need is visibility. And there's a set of capabilities that have kind of been categorized as AI security posture management or AISPM. And this set of capabilities ultimately means I need visibility into these services. So, which cloud accounts are they running in? And then the next step gets into what data can these services access. So recognizing that now I have visibility into the services being run at my cloud accounts, what data are they touching? What storage buckets or databases, and what's contained within those components. And then finally, setting guardrails around who can create these services, where they can run, and who has access to them are incredibly important. Obviously, development and DevOps teams are motivated to ship features more quickly, code more quickly, and Gen AI can really propel that. But you want to make sure that we're not giving away corporate information or sensitive data within those LLMs. It's a very challenging problem for a lot of security teams, but like many concerns, it all starts with visibility.
Okay. And regarding that, do you think AI workloads are exposing new cloud attacks surfaces?
I think it's a great question to ask if AI workloads are exposing new cloud attack surfaces or threat vectors. And I think the most important thing to think about is that AI workloads can ultimately connect to many sensitive data types in the cloud. So you want to make sure that you understand which data is being accessed by these different LLMs, and is it ultimately approved by the security team or the compliance team or other product owners. So I think that the challenge with AI workloads is that they're new, they're changing incredibly rapidly, and they're ultimately driven by the business wanting to deploy more quickly, achieve more business value, or bring more and more features to market. But I think, again, security teams need to make sure that they have visibility and can understand how these AI workloads plug into the overall attack surface.
Thank you for those insights, Kate. Let's speak about bringing dev I security teams. Security can't be an afterthought, but it often clashes with the speed. How do we avoid DevSec operations becoming just a buzzword?
So I think it's really important to think of security as something that's plugged in to your common DevOps workflows rather than being an afterthought. And DevSecOps refers to having an approach where security is embedded into your deployment workflows. This can mean looking at all your Git repositories and seeing if you have any embedded secrets or other important sensitive data that you wouldn't want access to the outside world. With your Git repositories, making sure that you understand who has access to them and that's governed properly by the security team. And then as you build and deploy your applications, do you have standard security checks built in where a developer, whether it's part of their IDE or their CI workflow, can see things like vulnerabilities, open source license issues, or configuration issues directly within their developer tooling? Then the security team can constantly monitor those checks or even start embedding guardrails where certain high risk issues wouldn't be able to move to production. The overall goal would be ensuring that developers or development teams can deploy it very, very quickly, but security is an embedded stakeholder in that process and in the overall ROI of that program.
Okay, interesting, Kate. Where do you see often most friction happening between devs and security?
I think there can be a lot of friction between devs and security. And one of the issues that security can also often be seen at an organization is being seen as a blocker. So security puts up a stop sign to slow things down, where security might have good intentions to ensure that their cloud native applications are overall released in a very, very good way. But developers are driven by potentially different business results, shipping code quickly, and delivering new features to the market. So I think for security teams to overcome that friction, they need to be knowledgeable about cloud environments and cloud native application architectures. So being really educated about how devs are coding and building their applications, but then also finding ways to sit side by side with that organization where the security team can be an educator about secure application deployments, and devs can also be a stakeholder in those overall results as part of their goals as well. So I think overcoming that friction is a really, really important goal of any good security program.
All right. What are some tactical things organizations can do to embed security without slowing innovation?
There are many tactical things that an org can do to embed security without slowing down innovation. And I'll talk about it across two key layers. The first one is automating security processes into existing workflows. So this can be a part of standard pull requests, coding within the IDE, or as part of every CI/CD workflow. So these security checks become something that's embedded as part of these normal processes. The second thing you can do is more organizational. So I've seen security teams have a day every couple of weeks or as part of some standard timeline where they have a regular check-in to solve issues together at the organization. I've seen organizations host hackathons where the security teams and the dev teams partner together to build and deploy something with different standards in mind. Or I've seen other security education days happen at the organization where they either bring vendors on site, other practitioners or leaders to educate teams about the goal of each different business unit. So I think it's important to understand that there are many tactical things you can do as part of processes, but overall people connectivity or collaboration.
Well, also wanted to ask you, do you have any success case or story where developers and security teams have finally got aligned?
I think you can look to different companies' successes to see where dev and security teams were aligned. And the number one result is ultimately being able to deploy your applications at the same pace that you want, but improving the overall security posture. So, one example of that could be measuring a metric like mean time to remediation. So, when you find a flaw in production, can you drive down the time needed to fix that flaw? Another one might be finding a specific package or framework and driving down the number of alerts or deployments where that package is involved. I think every organization is going to measure those metrics differently, but if you have some sort of automated tool in place where you can look at an overall security score or some of these other metrics, then you know and can prove month over month, quarter over quarter, or some other time frame that you're achieving on that metric and improving the overall risk posture across your organization.
Very interesting insights, Kate. Finally, to wrap up some key takeaways, if you have one message for business leaders who think we're covered by our cloud provider or that everything is fine, what could it be?
Yeah, so I think every security leader should be asking themselves, what's my responsibility in relation to my cloud provider when it comes to security? And it's important to recognize that if you don't have metrics in place to measure your security and prioritize your most important risks, you very likely have gaps across your organization. And so, my message to business leaders would be you should feel empowered to recognize that there's lots of great tools and processes to deliver amazing results in the cloud. And there are champions at your organization security architects and practitioners that can be very successful if you give them the right tools and guidance to achieve incredible results at your company.
Okay, what's one practical step listeners can take this week to improve their cloud security posture?
Yeah, so I think there's many different practical steps that users can take to improve their overall cloud security posture. I think the first one I would say is go to your cloud service provider and understand the guidance that they're giving you to secure their cloud environment. Each cloud security provider is supporting their own best practices or CIS benchmarks within their cloud environment. And I would look at the resources that they have to give you guidance about what you can learn for securing their cloud environment. The second thing I would say is consider looking at the different training programs that the cloud service providers have so you can potentially involve yourself in one of those trainings. I've done them myself. I know many other technical folks have as well. They have introductory courses as well as more and more technical ones. But looking and measuring your overall educational success against those frameworks or programs is a great way to see where you can build your own roadmap for success in the cloud.
Okay, and where can people follow your work or learn more about you?
If you'd like to learn more about Orca Security or connect with myself or my team, feel free to head over to orca.security. I would highly recommend you visit our resources like our blog, where we're talking about different industry evolutions as well as new product features that we're releasing. I'm also glad to connect with anyone on LinkedIn. So if you find me there under my name at Orca Security, I'd be glad to share more information.
Okay, thank you very much, Kate, for your time. Thanks again. And also to all you who are listening this, stay secure and always ask what's really happening under that hood of your cloud.